What if the stories we know are wrong? What if a queen's famous madness was a political prison? What if a powerful ruler's last words were a secret code we still haven't cracked? And history is full of powerful women who wore crowns. Their lives were recorded, their deaths were noted, but sometimes between the lines of official records, there is silence. There are gaps, there are questions that have no answers. These are the stories of queens whose lives, and sometimes deaths, are wrapped in a mystery that time has not solved. Number 17, where did Nefertiti go? She vanished from all records around year 14 of her husband's reign. Her famous painted bust, one of the most iconic images from the ancient world, was found in a sculptor's workshop, not a royal tomb. To this day, no one has definitively identified her mummy. She was one of the most powerful women in Egypt, and then she was gone. Nefertiti was a queen of Egypt during the 18th dynasty. She lived around 1350 BC. She was the great royal wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten. He was a radical. He overturned centuries of Egyptian religion. He told his people to stop worshipping a pantheon of gods. Instead, they were to worship one god, the sun disk, Aten. It was a massive disruptive change, and Nefertiti was right there with him. She wasn't just a wife in the background. The art from the time shows her in ways queens were rarely shown. She is depicted leading worship of the Aten, driving her own chariot, and even smiting enemies, a pose usually reserved for the pharaoh alone. She held a level of influence and visibility that was almost unprecedented. She and Akhenaten had 6 daughters. Their family life was often depicted in intimate naturalistic carvings, a sharp break from the stiff, formal art of previous pharaohs. For about a dozen years, she was at the center of this new, sun-drenched world. Then, around the 14th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign, she disappears. Her name stops appearing on new monuments. Her images are no longer carved. It is an abrupt and total silence. What happened to her is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of ancient Egypt. There are several theories, but each one has problems. The simplest theory is that she died. A plague is known to have swept through Egypt around that time. Perhaps she was one of its victims. This would explain her sudden absence. But if she died, where is her tomb? As a powerful queen, she would have been given a lavish burial. No tomb has ever been found that is definitively hers. Some Egyptologists have looked for hidden chambers in the tomb of her husband or her stepson, Tutankhamun, but so far nothing has been found. The lack of a body or a tomb is a major hole in this theory. If the great queen died, you would expect some record of it, some place of burial. There is nothing. Another theory is that she fell from grace. Perhaps she had a falling out with Akhenaten. Maybe she disagreed with his religious revolution, or maybe he simply cast her aside for another wife. Some evidence points to Akhenaten taking another of his wives, a woman named Kia, and elevating her status. But later, Kia's name also disappears and is sometimes replaced by the name of one of Nefertiti's daughters. The royal court at Amarna was clearly a place of shifting politics. It's possible Nefertiti lost a power struggle and was exiled or placed under house arrest. This would explain her disappearance from public life, but again, there is no solid proof. It is an argument from silence. A more intriguing theory turns this idea on its head. What if she didn't fall from power, but gained more? Some historians suggest that Nefertiti was elevated to the status of co-regent, ruling alongside her husband with a new name, Nefertiti. This new name does appear in the records toward the end of Akhenaten's reign. This co-regent might have even ruled alone for a short time after Akhenaten's death, before the young Tutankhamun took the throne. In this scenario, Nefertiti didn't disappear. She just changed her name and her role. The evidence for this is complex. It involves analyzing hieroglyphs where one name has been carved over another and re-examining artifacts that were once thought to belong to a male pharaoh. Some statues and carvings of a pharaoh from this period have feminine features, suggesting they might be depictions of a woman ruling as king. If this is true, Nefertiti would join a very small group of women who ruled Egypt as pharaoh, but the evidence is not conclusive. Scholars are still fiercely debating whether Nefertiti was Nefertiti or another person entirely, perhaps one of her daughters. The mystery of her body is just as deep. In 1898, a tomb known as KV-35 was found to contain a cache of royal mummies. Among them were two unidentified female mummies, known as the Elder Lady and the Younger Lady. For a long time, people hoped one might be Nefertiti. DNA testing in the 21st century identified the Elder Lady as Queen Tiye Akhenaten's mother. The Younger Lady was identified as the mother of Tutankhamun. Genetic analysis showed she was a full sister to her husband, the mummy found in tomb KV-55 believed to be Akhenaten. This means the Younger Lady could not be Nefertiti, as she was never referred to as Akhenaten's sister. So the search continues. Every few years, a new claim is made, a new potential tomb is scanned, a new theory is put forward. But nothing is ever proven. Nefertiti remains a face without a story, a queen who stepped out of the light and into a shadow that has lasted for over 3,000 years. Number 16. What did Empress Wu Zetian's blank tombstone mean? She was the only woman to ever rule China as emperor in her own right. She founded her own dynasty, the Zhou, interrupting the Great Tang dynasty for 15 years. After her death in 705 AD, a massive stele, a stone monument, was erected at her tomb. But unlike every other emperor's stele, which would be covered in characters praising their glorious reign, hers was left completely blank. Wu Zetian's life was a masterclass in political maneuvering. She entered the court of Emperor Taizong as a low-ranking concubine when she was just 14 years old. She was intelligent and ambitious. After the emperor's death, she managed to avoid the fate of most childless concubines who were sent to a Buddhist monastery for life. She had formed a connection with the heir, Li Ji, who became Emperor Gaozong. He brought her back to the palace. From there, her rise was meteoric. She outmaneuvered her rivals, including the existing Empress Wang. She became the new Empress consort. When Emperor Gaozong suffered a stroke later in his reign, he became weak and unable to rule effectively. Wu Zetian stepped in. She was the power behind the throne for years, ruling in his name. After his death, she ruled through her sons, placing them on the throne and then deposing them when they challenged her authority. Finally, in 690 AD, at the age of 67, she took the ultimate step. She declared herself Empress Regnant, the Huangdi. It was a title no woman had ever held. Her reign was a mix of ruthlessness and effective governance. She used a secret police to eliminate her enemies and critics. The political climate was one of fear for those in the aristocracy and government. But for the common people, her reign was often seen as a period of stability and prosperity. She promoted talented officials based on merit rather than birth, expanded the empire, and supported Buddhism. She was a complex and powerful ruler who broke every rule of what a woman was supposed to be in 7th century China. In 705 AD, when she was over 80 and very ill, her court officials forced her to abdicate in favor of her son. The Tang dynasty was restored. She died later that year. She was buried alongside her husband, Emperor Gaozong, at the Qianling Mausoleum. And then there is the stele. It stands over 6 meters tall. It is a huge, imposing slab of stone, and it is completely empty. For over 1,300 years, people have debated why. There is no definitive answer, only theories that reflect the mystery of the woman herself. One theory is that she intended it to be blank. This is the most popular idea. In this version, Wu Zetian left it blank as a sign of her own greatness. Her accomplishments were so vast, so beyond words, that they could not be contained in a simple inscription. She was saying, "My deeds speak for themselves, let future generations judge me." It was a gesture of supreme confidence, a final, audacious act from a woman who had always done the unexpected. She was leaving her legacy for history to write, not for her court scribes. Another theory is the opposite. It suggests the blank stele was an act of humility. Perhaps in her final days, she felt some remorse for her actions or wanted to show deference to her husband. By leaving her monument blank while his was covered in praise, she was posthumously restoring the traditional order. She was returning to her role as Empress Consort, not ruling emperor. This seems less likely given her personality, but it's a possibility. After her abdication, her title was changed back to Empress Consort Zetian. The blank stele might have been a reflection of this final, demoted status. A third theory is more political. It suggests that her successors couldn't agree on what to write. She was a controversial figure. How could they praise her reign without legitimizing her usurpation of the Tang throne? How could they condemn her without disrespecting the mother of the restored emperor? They were caught in a difficult position. Praising her would be an insult to the Tang dynasty. Criticizing her would be an insult to the current emperor's mother. The easiest solution was to write nothing at all. The blank stele was a political compromise, a way to avoid a problem they couldn't solve. Over the centuries, others have added their own marks to the stele. There are over 1,000 characters carved into it now, left by later visitors and scholars offering poems and commentary. But the original face of the monument remains as it was intended. We don't know if it was Wu Zetian's final act of power, a symbol of her unwritable legacy, or a political headache her successors chose to ignore. The Silent Stone stands as a perfect monument to a woman whose life was loud, complicated, and ultimately left for us to interpret. Number 15. Was Juana of Castile really mad? For nearly 50 years, she was the rightful queen of Castile and Aragon, the lands that would become Spain. But she never ruled. Instead, she was locked away in a convent palace in Tordesillas. History calls her Juana la Loca or Joanna the Mad. The official story is that she was mentally unstable, driven to insanity by her husband's betrayals and death. But what if she wasn't mad at all? What if her madness was a convenient excuse used by the men in her life, her father, her husband, and her son, to steal her crown? Juana was born in 1479, the daughter of the famous Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. These were the monarchs who unified Spain and funded Christopher Columbus. Juana was intelligent and well-educated. She was also known for being passionate and melancholic. At 16, she was sent to Flanders to marry Philip the Handsome, the Duke of Burgundy. The marriage was political, meant to forge an alliance. By all accounts, it started with intense passion. Juana was deeply in love with her husband, but Philip was notoriously unfaithful. His constant affairs tormented Juana. She became intensely jealous, and her behavior grew erratic. There are reports of her flying into rages and confronting his supposed lovers. The situation worsened after a series of deaths in her family. Her only brother, her older sister, and her nephew all died unexpectedly. Suddenly, Juana was the heir to the massive Spanish kingdom. In 1504, her mother, Queen Isabella, died, and Juana became Queen of Castile. She and Philip traveled from Flanders to Spain to claim her throne, but the men around her were already plotting. Her husband, Philip, had no interest in being just the queen's consort. He wanted to be king. Her father, Ferdinand, didn't want to give up the power he had wielded for decades. They both began to spread rumors about Juana's mental instability. They issued documents claiming she was unfit to rule, allowing them to take control. The key event that cemented her reputation for madness was Philip's death in 1506. He died suddenly of a fever at the age of 28. Juana was devastated. Her grief was profound and, by the standards of the time, excessive. The story that has been told for centuries is that she refused to be separated from his coffin. She had it opened repeatedly so she could look at his face. She traveled with his body for months in a bizarre funeral procession across the country, only moving at night. This is the image of Joanna the Mad that history remembers. But even these stories might be exaggerated. Traveling with a body for a long period before burial wasn't unheard of for royalty, and her insistence on keeping women away from the coffin could be seen as a final, desperate act of jealousy against the man who had hurt her so much. After Philip's death, her father, Ferdinand, returned to Castile and took control. He declared Juana incompetent and had her confined to the royal convent of Santa Clara at Tordesillas in 1509. She would remain there for the rest of her life. When Ferdinand died in 1516, Juana's own son, the future Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, arrived in Spain. He did not free his mother. He met with her, secured her signature on documents that legitimized his rule as her co-monarch, and then left her imprisoned. He continued to keep her isolated, ensuring she could never be a threat to his power. For 46 years, she was a queen in name only, a prisoner in a gilded cage. Was she truly insane? It's impossible to know for sure. She may have suffered from a genuine mental illness, perhaps depression, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, exacerbated by her grief and the betrayals she suffered. But it's also highly plausible that her condition was deliberately exaggerated. The men in her life had everything to gain by having her declared unfit. A passionate, intelligent, and strong-willed woman who insisted on her right to rule was a problem. A mad woman was easily controlled. Any act of defiance, any emotional outburst, any refusal to cooperate could be presented as further proof of her insanity. She was trapped in a situation where her every action was interpreted through the lens of her supposed madness. There was one moment when she could have been freed. In 1520, a revolt against her son Charles broke out. The rebels captured Tordesillas and tried to get Juana to support them. They wanted her to sign a document declaring her sanity and reclaiming her throne. For a moment she seemed to consider it, but she hesitated and ultimately refused to act against her son. The rebellion was crushed, and her last chance for freedom was gone. She died in 1555, in her 70s, having spent almost 5 decades as a captive queen. The mystery isn't whether she suffered. She clearly did. The mystery is the nature of her suffering. Was it an illness of the mind, or was it the predictable result of being a woman with a crown that every man around her wanted to take? Number 14, what really happened to Boudica's body. She was the warrior queen of the Iceni, a Celtic tribe in ancient Britain. In 60 or 61 AD, she led a massive rebellion against the occupying Roman forces. Her army destroyed 3 Roman cities, including Londinium, and killed tens of thousands of people. For a brief moment, she came close to driving the Romans out of Britain entirely. But in the end, her tribal army was defeated by a smaller, better disciplined Roman legion. The Roman historian Tacitus tells us that after the final battle, Boudica ended her own life. But then her story stops. Her final resting place is completely unknown. Boudica's rebellion was born from deep personal grievance. Her husband Persudicus was the king of the Iceni. He was a client king of Rome, meaning he was allowed to rule his own people as long as he remained loyal to the empire. When he died, he tried to protect his family and his kingdom. In his will, he left his kingdom jointly to his 2 daughters and to the Roman emperor, Nero. He hoped this would ensure a peaceful transition and protect his people. He was wrong. The Romans ignored his will. They annexed his kingdom, seized the property of the Iceni nobles, and treated the entire tribe as conquered subjects. When Boudica protested, she was publicly flogged, her daughters were assaulted. It was a brutal and humiliating act meant to crush the spirit of the Iceni. It had the opposite effect. It ignited a firestorm of fury. Boudica was a charismatic leader. She united the Iceni with other disgruntled tribes like the Trinovantes. She amassed a huge army, perhaps as many as 100,000 strong. They fell first on the Roman colony of Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. They burned it to the ground. Next, they marched on Londinium, London, a growing commercial center. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, decided it was indefensible and abandoned it. Boudica's army destroyed the city. They did the same to Verulamium St. Albans. The rebels showed no mercy. Roman accounts written by their enemies described scenes of horrific destruction. But for the Britons, it was righteous vengeance. The final showdown came at a location we can no longer identify, somewhere in the Midlands of England. Suetonius had gathered his legions, a force of about 10,000 men. He chose his ground carefully, a narrow gorge, with a forest behind him, opening onto a plain. This meant Boudica's massive army could not use their superior numbers to surround him. They had to attack him head-on. The Britons were confident. They brought their families in wagons to watch the victory, parking them in a crescent shape behind their lines. This would prove to be a fatal mistake. The discipline of the Roman legions won the day. They held their ground against the initial Celtic charge, then advanced in a tight wedge formation, tearing through the rebel lines. The battle turned into a rout. The Britons tried to flee, but their escape was blocked by their own wagons. The Roman victory was absolute. Tacitus gives a simple account of Boudicca's end. He says she put an end to her life with poison. Another Roman historian, Cassius Dio, writing over a century later, tells a different story. He says Boudicca fell ill and died and was given a lavish, heroic burial. So we have two different accounts from the Romans themselves. One suggests a private, desperate act. The other suggests a public, honored death. Neither tells us where she was buried. The search for Boudicca's grave has become a kind of modern British legend. For centuries, people have claimed to have found it. The most famous and persistent myth places her grave under a platform at King's Cross railway station in London. The story goes that the final battle took place near there, at a place once known as Battlebridge. The legend gained popularity in the Victorian era when Boudica was rediscovered as a national heroine. There is absolutely no archaeological evidence to support this. It is a piece of folklore, a romantic story attached to a place name. Another theory in the 19th century suggested she was buried under a large mound on Parliament Hill in Hampstead Heath. This too was excavated and found to contain nothing of the sort. Other suggestions have placed her grave in Norfolk or Suffolk, the heartland of the Iceni. But no burial of a high-status Iron Age woman from that exact period has ever been found that could plausibly be hers. The truth is, we will likely never find her. If she did take her own life, her followers might have buried her secretly to prevent the Romans from desecrating her body. A secret grave is, by its nature, almost impossible to find 2,000 years later. If she was given a grand burial, as Cassius Dio suggests, it's possible the Romans destroyed it to prevent it from becoming a shrine for future rebellions. Or it may simply be lost to time, its mound flattened, its location forgotten. Boudica has become a powerful symbol of freedom and resistance. But the woman herself, the physical queen, vanished after her last battle, leaving behind a legacy of fire and a mystery of earth. Number 13, who were the princes in the tower, and was their aunt involved? The story is one of the most famous in English history. In 1483, King Edward IV died suddenly. His two young sons, 12-year-old Edward V and his 9-year-old brother Richard, Duke of York, were his heirs. Their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector. He was supposed to guard the boys and prepare for the young king's coronation. Instead, he took the boys to the Tower of London, ostensibly for their safety. Then he had them declared illegitimate. He took the throne himself, becoming King Richard III. The two princes were seen in the tower for a few weeks, and then they were never seen again. The universal assumption is that they were murdered. The great mystery is not just who did it, but how it involved the women around them, particularly their aunt, Anne Neville. Anne Neville was the wife of Richard III. Her life was deeply entangled with the Wars of the Roses, the brutal civil war between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. She was the daughter of Warwick the Kingmaker, one of the most powerful nobles in England. She was first married to the Lancastrian heir, Edward of Westminster. He was killed in battle. After that, she married Richard, a Yorkist prince. When her brother-in-law, Edward IV, died, her husband became king, and she became Queen of England. She was at the center of power when her two young nephews disappeared. The traditional story, popularized by Tudor historians like Sir Thomas More and William Shakespeare, places the blame squarely on Richard III. He is portrayed as a ruthless tyrant who killed his own nephews to secure his crown. In this version, he ordered the boys to be smothered in their sleep. This has been the dominant narrative for over 500 years. It's simple, dramatic, and has a clear villain. But is it the whole truth? The disappearance of the princess happened on Anne Neville's watch as queen. She was living in the royal apartments while the boys were held in another part of the tower complex. What did she know? This is a question that is rarely asked. History has largely portrayed her as a tragic, passive figure, a pawn in the games of men. But she was the queen. She had her own household, her own staff, her own influence. It is hard to believe that two of the most important children in the kingdom could be murdered within the walls of a royal residence without the queen having some inkling of what was happening. Did she know and approve? Did she know and feel powerless to stop it? Or did she not know at all, kept in the dark by her husband? We have no letters, no diaries from her. Her thoughts on the matter are lost. Her own situation was precarious. She and Richard had one son, Edward of Middleham. He was their only heir. He died suddenly in 1484, just a year after Richard became king. His death was a devastating blow, both personally and politically. It left Richard III without a clear successor. Anne Neville herself died a few months later in March 1485. The timing of her death was suspicious to many at the time. There were rumors that Richard had poisoned her so he could marry his own niece, Elizabeth of York, the older sister of the missing princes. This would have been a cynical but politically smart move, as it would have united the warring houses. There is no evidence for this, and Richard publicly denied the rumors, but the fact that they existed shows the atmosphere of distrust and conspiracy that surrounded the court. The mystery deepens when you consider other suspects. While Richard III had the most obvious motive, he wasn't the only one who benefited from the boy's disappearance. Henry Tudor, who would eventually defeat Richard at the Battle of Bosworth Field and become King Henry VII, also had a motive. As long as the princes were alive, they were a threat to his claim to the throne. If they had been alive when he took power, he would have had a serious problem. Their disappearance conveniently cleared the way for him. Another suspect is the Duke of Buckingham, who was initially Richard's biggest supporter and then rebelled against him. Perhaps he killed the boys and tried to frame Richard. In 1674, nearly 200 years after they vanished, workmen at the Tower of London found a wooden chest buried under a staircase. Inside were the skeletons of 2 young children. They were assumed to be the lost princes. King Charles II had them interred in Westminster Abbey. In 1933, the bones were exhumed and examined. The examination confirmed they were the remains of 2 children, roughly the right age. But the science of the time could not determine a cause of death or definitively identify them. Modern DNA analysis could potentially solve the mystery once and for all by comparing the DNA from the skeletons to that of their known relatives. But so far, requests to re-examine the remains have been denied by the Queen of England and the Church of England. So, the mystery endures. We have a crime with no bodies, a queen consort whose role is a complete blank, and a set of bones that may or may not be the victims. Anne Neville's life shows how women, even queens, could be trapped in these power struggles. Was she a grieving aunt, a knowing accomplice, or a fearful wife? Her silence is part of the larger silence that surrounds the fate of her nephews. Number 12. Did Tsarina Alexandra's faith doom her family? Tsarina Alexandra Feodorovna was the last empress of Russia. She was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England. She was a devoted wife to Tsar Nicholas II and a loving mother to their 5 children. She was also deeply religious and mystical. Her faith led her to place her absolute trust in one of the most controversial figures in Russian history, Grigory Rasputin. The mystery surrounding her is not about her death, which was tragically public, but about the extent to which her personal beliefs and her reliance on a single holy man sealed the fate of a 300-year-old dynasty. Alexandra, born Alix of Hesse, was a carrier of the gene for hemophilia. It was a terrible secret she passed on to her only son and heir, Alexei. Hemophilia was a death sentence in the early 20th century. Any small bump or cut could lead to uncontrollable bleeding and agonizing pain. The doctors were helpless. The royal family lived in constant fear for the boy's life. This desperation was the door through which Rasputin entered. Rasputin was a Siberian peasant, a wandering mystic who had a reputation as a healer and a man of God. He was introduced to the royal family in 1905. He was rough, uneducated, and had a scandalous reputation. But he seemed to have an almost miraculous ability to help Alexei. On several occasions, when the boy was suffering from a severe bleeding episode and near death, Rasputin would arrive, pray, and Alexei would recover. The doctors couldn't explain it. To the desperate Tsarina, it was a miracle. She came to believe that Rasputin was a holy man sent by God to save her son. Her faith in him became absolute and unshakable. This is where the mystery begins. How did he do it? There is no evidence of supernatural powers. Some theories suggest Rasputin used hypnosis to calm the boy, which would have lowered his blood pressure and slowed the bleeding. And others believe he simply insisted that the doctors stop giving Alexei aspirin. Aspirin was a common pain reliever at the time, but it is also a blood thinner. By stopping the aspirin, Rasputin would have inadvertently helped the boy's blood to clot, or perhaps his calming presence simply had a powerful psychosomatic effect on both mother and child. Whatever the method, it worked. And because it worked, Alexandra gave him her complete trust. This trust had catastrophic consequences. As World War I began, Tsar Nicholas II went to the front to command the army. He left Alexandra in charge of domestic affairs in the capital, St. Petersburg. And Alexandra relied on Rasputin's advice for everything. She believed his words were the words of God. He began to influence political appointments. Competent ministers were dismissed and replaced by Rasputin's incompetent cronies. He meddled in government policy and military strategy. The government descended into chaos. Rumors spread like wildfire. People believed Rasputin was a German spy. They whispered that he was having an affair with the Tsarina and her daughters. None of this was true, but it destroyed the reputation of the royal family. The public saw a weak Tsar being controlled by his German wife, who in turn was being controlled by a debauched peasant. The question is, was Alexandra a naive victim or a willing participant in the destruction of the monarchy? She was not a stupid woman, but she was stubborn, and she lived in an isolated bubble. She saw the criticism of Rasputin as an attack on her faith and on God's will. She refused to listen to anyone, not her husband's ministers, not members of her own family. She wrote letters to Nicholas at the front filled with Rasputin's advice, urging him to be a strong autocrat and ignore the calls for reform. She told him, "Listen to our friend." Her faith blinded her to the political reality that was crumbling around her. In December 1916, a group of aristocrats, including the Tsar's own cousin, decided the only way to save the monarchy was to get rid of Rasputin. They lured him to a palace, poisoned him, shot him, and dumped his body in a frozen river. They thought they had saved Russia, but it was too late. The damage was done. The murder of Rasputin didn't restore faith in the monarchy, it just proved how corrupt and chaotic things had become. Just a few months later, in March 1917, the revolution began. The Tsar abdicated. The Romanov dynasty was over. The mystery of Alexandra is a psychological one. Her love for her son was her greatest virtue, but it led her to a faith that became her greatest flaw. Did she understand the political damage she was causing? Or did she believe so fervently that she was doing God's work that she couldn't see the disaster she was creating? Her actions were not those of an evil person, but of someone whose private desperation and intense, narrow faith had massive public consequences. She thought she was saving her son, but in her attempt to do so, she played a key role in the downfall of her entire world. The unexplained element is the sheer power of Rasputin's influence. Was it simply his ability to help Alexei, or was there something more? A powerful psychological hold he had over a desperate and isolated empress. Her story is a haunting example of how private belief can shape public destiny in the most tragic ways. Number 11. Why was Hatshepsut erased from history? She ruled Egypt as a full pharaoh for over 2 decades, from roughly 1478 to 1458 BC. Her reign was one of peace and prosperity. She was a prolific builder responsible for some of the most magnificent temples and monuments in Egyptian history. Yet, years after her death, a systematic campaign was launched to erase her from memory. Her name was chiseled off stone walls. Her statues were smashed and buried. Her image was removed from temple reliefs. For thousands of years, it was as if she had never existed. The mystery is twofold. Why was she erased, and who gave the order? Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh Thutmose I. She married her half-brother, Thutmose II. When he died, the heir was his young son, Thutmose III, born to a lesser wife. Hatshepsut was supposed to act as regent, ruling only until her stepson was old enough to take the throne. But Hatshepsut was not content to be a temporary placeholder. Within a few years, she did something unprecedented. She had herself crowned pharaoh. She took on the full titles and regalia of a king. She wore the traditional false beard and the royal kilt. She co-ruled with Thutmose III, but there was no doubt who was the senior partner. She was the pharaoh. Her reign was remarkably successful. Unlike many of her predecessors and successors, she focused less on military conquest and more on trade and construction. She sent a famous trading expedition to the land of Punt, likely modern-day Eritrea or Somalia, which brought back immense wealth, including incense, ebony, and exotic animals. She used this wealth to fund a massive building program. Her greatest achievement was her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. It is a stunning three-tiered temple built into the side of a cliff, a masterpiece of ancient architecture. In her art and inscriptions, she justified her rule by claiming that the god Amun was her true father and that he had chosen her to rule Egypt. She was a powerful and effective leader. She ruled for about 22 years. When she died, her stepson Thutmose III finally became the sole ruler of Egypt. He had been waiting in the wings for over 2 decades. And here is where the mystery begins. The erasure of Hatshepsut did not happen immediately after her death. For about 20 years, her memory was left untouched. Thutmose III seemed to respect her legacy, but late in his reign, something changed. The campaign of destruction began. Workers were sent all over Egypt with chisels and hammers. At her temple in Deir el-Bahri, her statues were dragged out, smashed to pieces, and dumped in a pit. On the walls, her image was replaced with that of her father, her husband, or her stepson. Her name in cartouches was methodically cut out. The same thing happened at the Great Temple of Karnak and other sites. The goal was clearly to remove any evidence that a woman had ever ruled as pharaoh. Who ordered this and why? The most obvious suspect is Thutmose III. For a long time, the prevailing theory was that this was an act of personal revenge. Perhaps he had resented his stepmother for keeping him from power for so long. Once he was secure on the throne and nearing the end of his own long reign, he decided to take his final revenge, wiping her from the historical record. It's a compelling human drama, but it has problems. If he hated her so much, why did he wait 20 years to do it? And why did he allow her to be buried with full honors in the Valley of the Kings? His own tomb is located right next to hers. This doesn't seem like the action of a man consumed by personal hatred. A more recent theory is that the erasure was not personal, but political. Thutmose III may not have hated Hatshepsut, but he may have seen her reign as a dangerous precedent. The idea of a woman becoming pharaoh went against Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order and balance. A female king was an anomaly that needed to be corrected. By erasing her, Thutmose III wasn't attacking Hatshepsut the person. He was restoring the traditional male-only line of succession. He was ensuring that no future ambitious royal woman could point to Hatshepsut as an example and try to take the throne for herself. This was about protecting the future of the pharaonic institution. This theory better explains the 20-year delay. It took that long for the political necessity of the act to become clear. It's also possible that the erasure was started by Thutmose III, but continued by later pharaohs like his son Amenhotep II. The goal was to create a clean, unbroken line of male rulers from Thutmose I to Thutmose II to Thutmose III. Hatshepsut's reign was an inconvenient interruption that needed to be smoothed over. For centuries, their plan worked. Hatshepsut was forgotten. Early Egyptologists were confused by the evidence. They found inscriptions referring to a female king, but didn't know who she was. It wasn't until the 20th century that scholars were able to piece together the story, painstakingly reassembling the smashed statues and deciphering the damaged inscriptions. In 2007, a mummy that had been found in a minor tomb decades earlier was identified through DNA testing as the lost queen. After 3,500 years of forced obscurity, Hatshepsut was finally found, but the full reason for her attempted erasure remains a debate. Was it the personal grudge of a resentful stepson, or the cold political calculation of a pharaoh trying to stabilize his dynasty? The smashed stones cannot tell us. Number 10 were the casket letters Rial. Mary, Queen of Scots, was one of the most charismatic and tragic figures in British history. Her life was a whirlwind of political intrigue, passion, and betrayal. The central mystery of her reign, the event that led directly to her downfall, revolves around a small silver casket and the letters it supposedly contained. These letters, if genuine, implicated her in a plot to murder her second husband, Lord Darnley, and suggested she was having an affair with the man who would become her third husband, the Earl of Bothwell. But were the letters real? Or were they brilliant forgeries created by her enemies to destroy her? This question has never been answered. Mary Stuart became Queen of Scotland when she was just 6 days old in 1542. She was sent to France to be raised in the sophisticated French court. She married the French heir and was briefly Queen of France. After her husband's early death, she returned to Scotland in 1561 to rule a country that was politically divided and in the midst of a turbulent Protestant Reformation. Mary was a Catholic. This immediately put her at odds with many of her powerful nobles, including her own half-brother, the Earl of Moray. Her personal life was just as complicated. She married her cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. It was a disastrous match. Darnley was arrogant, ambitious, and violent. He grew jealous of Mary's private secretary, David Rizzio, and was part of a conspiracy that brutally murdered Rizzio in front of the pregnant queen. The marriage was broken beyond repair. Then, in February 1567, the house where Darnley was staying, just outside Edinburgh, was destroyed by a massive explosion. Darnley's body was found in the garden, seemingly strangled. He had not died in the blast. Suspicion immediately fell on James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, a powerful and ambitious noble. But suspicion also fell on Mary herself. Did she know about the plot? Just a few months after Darnley's murder, Mary married Bothwell. To the rest of the world, and to her own people, this looked incredibly guilty. It seemed to confirm that she and Bothwell had conspired to get rid of her husband so they could be together. The Scottish nobles rose up against her. After a brief confrontation, Mary was forced to abdicate her throne in favor of her infant son, James. She was imprisoned in a castle on an island in Loch Leven. This is where the casket letters enter the story. Her enemies, the Confederate lords led by her half-brother Moray, claimed they had seized a small silver casket from one of Bothwell's servants. Inside, they said, were 8 letters and some sonnets, allegedly from Mary to Bothwell. The documents were presented as absolute proof of her guilt. They were written in French. They detailed her love for Bothwell, her hatred of Darnley, and her knowledge of the murder plot. If they were real, she was guilty. Mary managed to escape her prison and raise an army, but she was defeated. She fled to England seeking protection from her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, but instead of help, she found another prison. Elizabeth saw the Catholic Mary, who had a strong claim to the English throne, as a massive threat. She set up a commission to investigate the charges against Mary. Moray and the Scottish lords presented the casket letters as their key evidence. The mystery is that no one knows for sure if the letters were genuine. The originals have been lost for centuries. All we have are copies and copies of copies in different languages. Mary herself never saw the letters. She was denied the chance to examine them. She always maintained they were forgeries. She demanded that the originals be produced, but they never were. The case for forgery is strong. Mary's enemies had the motive, the means, and the opportunity to create them. They needed to justify their rebellion against their lawful queen. What better way than to prove she was a murderer and an adulteress? It was known that some of the lords could imitate her handwriting. The language of the letters was also suspicious. Some phrases seemed clumsy, not the elegant French a woman raised in the French court would use, and the timeline presented in the letters didn't perfectly match Mary's known movements. The case for them being genuine, or at least partly genuine, is also compelling. Some of the details in the letters would have been very difficult for a forger to know. They contain intimate and personal information that seems authentic. A popular theory is that the letters were a mix. Perhaps they were genuine letters from Mary to Bothwell, but with incriminating passages about the murder plot skillfully inserted by forgers. This would explain both their authentic feel and their suspicious content. The commission in England never reached a formal verdict. Queen Elizabeth I was in a difficult position. She didn't want to condemn a fellow monarch, but she also couldn't let Mary go free. The result was a political fudge. The inquiry ended without clearing Mary's name, but also without officially finding her guilty. But the damage was done. The letters had tainted her reputation forever. She remained a prisoner in England for the next 19 years. She became the focus of numerous Catholic plots against Elizabeth. Eventually, she was implicated in a plot she did not deny and was executed in 1587. The silver casket and its contents determined the course of Mary's life. They cost her her crown, her freedom, and ultimately her life. But We will never know the truth. Were they the passionate, guilty words of a queen who plotted murder for love? Or were they a cold, calculated lie, a masterpiece of political character assassination? The originals vanished sometime in the late 16th century, taking the secret with them. Number 9. What did Elizabeth I really think and feel? Queen Elizabeth I of England is known as the Virgin Queen. She ruled for 45 years, from 1558 to 1603, a period of great flourishing known as the Elizabethan Age. She was a master of politics, propaganda, and survival. She successfully navigated religious divisions, faced down the Spanish Armada, and created a powerful cult of personality around herself. But behind the public image of Gloriana, the powerful, untouchable queen, married only to her kingdom, was a real woman. The great mystery of Elizabeth is not one of crime or disappearance, but of her inner life. What did she truly feel about the great questions of her reign, marriage, succession, and her relationships with the people closest to her? Her public statements were carefully crafted politics. Her private thoughts remained almost completely hidden. The biggest question was always marriage. For decades, it was the central issue of English politics. Her counselors, her parliament, and the people of England all begged her to marry and produce an heir. A monarch's first duty was to secure the succession. An unmarried queen with no children created a terrifyingly uncertain future. It left the kingdom vulnerable to civil war or foreign invasion. Elizabeth was presented with a long list of suitors from all over Europe, including King Philip II of Spain and French princes. She played the diplomatic game brilliantly, keeping potential suitors dangling for years, using the prospect of her hand in marriage as a political tool. But she never said yes. Why? Her official reason was that she was married to her people. This was great propaganda, but it doesn't explain her personal motivations. One theory is purely political. She understood that if she married a foreign prince, England could be drawn into foreign conflicts or dominated by a foreign power. If she married an English nobleman, it would create massive jealousy and factionalism at her court. By staying single, she kept all her options open and remained the sole center of power. It was a choice to prioritize her rule over her personal life. Another theory is more psychological. As a young woman, she had seen what marriage could do to women, even queens. She had seen her father, Henry VE, dispose of his wives one by one. Her own mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed on his orders. She saw her half-sister, Mary I, enter a deeply unhappy marriage to Philip of Spain that left her personally miserable and politically unpopular. Perhaps Elizabeth simply looked at the evidence and concluded that marriage was a trap, a loss of power and autonomy that she was not willing to risk. And then there was Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. He was her childhood friend and, by all accounts, the one great love of her life. For years, the court buzzed with rumors that they would marry, but Dudley was already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, died in 1560 from a fall down a flight of stairs. The death was ruled an accident, but many suspected Dudley had arranged it so he would be free to marry the Queen. The scandal was so great that it made marriage to him impossible for Elizabeth. It would have destroyed her reputation. Did she want to marry him? Most historians think she did. Her letters and her actions show a deep and abiding affection for him. But she put the crown first. She kept him close for the rest of his life, but she never married him. We can only guess at the personal cost of that decision. The question of the succession was another closely guarded secret. She refused to name her heir for almost her entire reign. To do so, she believed, would be to sign her own death warrant. As soon as an heir was named, that person would become a magnet for plots and conspiracies. Her potential successors would have an incentive to try to overthrow her. So she kept everyone guessing. It was a dangerous strategy, but it worked. It kept her political rivals off balance. And it wasn't until she was on her deathbed that she finally, and perhaps only implicitly, indicated that King James VI of Scotland, the son of her old rival Mary, Queen of Scots, should succeed her. Elizabeth I crafted her public image with immense care. She controlled her portraits, her speeches, her public appearances. She created the myth of the Virgin Queen, a semi-divine figure who had sacrificed her personal happiness for the good of her nation. It was one of the most successful public relations campaigns in history. But the mystery is the gap between the image and the woman. Did she regret not having a family? Was she lonely in her power? Did she ever wish for a different life? She left behind thousands of letters and documents, but almost none of them reveal her true private feelings. She was a queen who understood that, in a world of spies and schemers, the safest place for your thoughts was inside your own head. She kept her own counsel to the very end. Her inner world remains a closed book. Number 8. Why did a queen who had everything give it all away? Queen Christina of Sweden was one of the most enigmatic rulers of the 17th century. She was crowned king, not queen, to emphasize her authority. She was highly intelligent, a patron of arts and philosophy, and ruler of a major European power. And then, in 1654, at the age of 28, she did the unthinkable. She voluntarily abdicated her throne, gave up her crown, and left her country. Her reasons have been debated ever since. It was a decision that shocked Europe and remains one of history's most baffling personal choices by a monarch. Christina was born in 1626, the only surviving child of the great warrior king Gustavus Adolphus. Her father was killed in battle when she was just 6 years old. Before he left for the war, he had made sure to secure her succession and ordered that she be raised as a prince would be. She received a rigorous education studying politics, classics, philosophy, and multiple languages. She was brilliant, but also unconventional. She defied 17th century norms for women. She dressed in men's clothing, was an expert horse rider, and showed little interest in the traditional feminine pursuits of the court. When she came of age, she proved to be a strong-willed and intelligent ruler. She helped to negotiate the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the devastating 30 Years' War. She also spent lavishly on art and culture, inviting scholars and artists from all over Europe to her court in Stockholm. Most famously, she persuaded the French philosopher René Descartes to come and be her personal tutor. But the pressures of rule were immense. Her council and her people wanted her to marry and produce an heir to secure the Vasa dynasty. And Christina resisted. She had a strong aversion to marriage. She once declared that she could not be brought to marry. She felt it would mean subjugating herself to a man. Instead, she named her cousin Charles Gustave as her heir, solving the succession crisis but fueling speculation about her own future. Then came the abdication. It was a carefully planned process. She announced her intention to her shocked council, who initially tried to talk her out of it, but she was determined. On June 6, 1654, in a formal ceremony, she gave up her throne. She had her royal regalia removed piece by piece. She gave a final speech, and then she left Sweden, traveling across Europe disguised as a man. The most commonly cited reason for her abdication is her secret conversion to Catholicism. Sweden was a staunchly Lutheran Protestant nation. It had fought and won the 30 Years' War in the name of Protestantism. For its monarch to be a Catholic was legally and culturally impossible. Christina had become disillusioned with Lutheranism and was drawn to the culture and intellectual traditions of Catholic Southern Europe. After leaving Sweden, she made her way to Rome, where she was officially received into the Catholic Church by the Pope with great ceremony. For many, this is the simple answer. She had to give up her throne to follow her faith. But was it the only reason? Many historians think it's more complicated. Her conversion may have been a consequence of her decision to abdicate, not the sole cause of it. Her abdication gave her the freedom to convert, but other factors likely drove the decision itself. One was her desire for personal freedom. Christina was an intellectual and a free spirit trapped in the rigid formality of a royal court. She was tired of the business of governing, which she found boring. She hated the constant pressure to marry. By abdicating, she could escape all of it. She could live the life of a private, independent intellectual in the cultural heart of Europe, Rome. There may also have been a political and financial element. Christina's lavish spending on art and culture had brought the Swedish state to the brink of bankruptcy. Her government was in debt. By abdicating in favor of her cousin, a skilled general, she may have been stepping aside for someone she felt was better suited to handle the practical problems she had helped create. She ensured she would receive a generous pension so she could continue her lifestyle abroad without the responsibilities of a ruler. Her life after abdication was just as strange and unpredictable. In Rome, she established a vibrant court and became a major patron of music and theater. But she also grew restless. She involved herself in political schemes, including a bizarre plot to have herself installed as the Queen of Naples. The plot failed spectacularly and resulted in her ordering the execution of one of her own courtiers, an act that shocked her contemporaries. She never ruled again. She died in Rome in 1689 and was buried in St. Peter's Basilica, one of only a handful of women to receive that honor. So why did she do it? The mystery remains because no single reason seems sufficient. A religious conversion, a desire for personal freedom, a weariness with the burdens of rule, and perhaps a recognition of her own financial mismanagement all likely played a part. Christina was a person of deep contradictions. A ruler who didn't want to rule. A woman who lived like a man. A queen who valued her own mind more than her own crown. Her abdication was not a single choice, but the culmination of a life spent defying every expectation. Number 7. Who poisoned the Guangxu Emperor? For the last decade of his life, the Guangxu Emperor of China was a king without power. He was a prisoner in his own palace, held under a form of house arrest by his aunt, the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi. He was a reformer who wanted to modernize China. She was a conservative who wanted to maintain the old ways. In November 1908, he died. He was only 37 years old. Just 22 hours later, Empress Dowager Cixi also died. The official cause of the emperor's death was listed as natural causes, but for 100 years, rumors have persisted that he was poisoned. The question is, who did it? And was his powerful aunt the one who gave the order? The Guangxu emperor, whose personal name was Zetian, ascended the throne in 1875 as a small child. Because he was so young, the real power was held by his aunt Cixi, who had been the de facto ruler of China for many years. For the first part of his reign, he was her puppet. But as he grew older, he grew frustrated. He saw that China was falling behind the Western powers and Japan. He believed that the only way for the Qing dynasty to survive was through radical reform. In 1898, he saw his chance. With the help of a group of progressive officials, he launched the 100 Days Reform. In a dizzying series of edicts issued over 103 days, he ordered sweeping changes to China's government, military, and education system. He wanted to create a constitutional monarchy, streamline the bureaucracy, and build a modern army. It was a direct challenge to the conservative establishment that Cixi controlled. The Cixi was not going to let this happen. With the backing of the military and conservative officials, she staged a coup. She confined the emperor to an island palace within the Forbidden City, effectively placing him under house arrest. She had his reformist advisors executed or exiled. She reversed all of his reforms. For the last 10 years of his life, from 1898 to 1908, the Guangxu emperor was a powerless figurehead. He was reportedly in poor health, suffering from chronic illnesses. Cixi continued to rule China in his name. In the autumn of 1908, it was clear that both the emperor and the 72-year-old Cixi were gravely ill. Cixi knew she was dying, and she knew that if she died before the emperor, he would likely be restored to power. He would almost certainly reverse her policies and punish the officials who had supported her, especially the man who had helped her in the coup, General Yuan Shikai. Cixi had already named a new heir, the emperor's young nephew Puyi. The stage was set for a final, deadly power play. On November 14th, 1908, the Guangxu emperor died. The very next day, Cixi died. The timing was extraordinarily suspicious. The official court records stated he died of natural causes, possibly from the kidney disease and tuberculosis he was known to suffer from. But rumors of poison started immediately. It seemed too convenient for Cixi's enemies that he would die just before she did. The prime suspect has always been Cixi herself. The motive was strong. She could not bear the thought of her life's work being undone. By ensuring the emperor died before her, she could guarantee that her chosen successor, the child Puyi, would take the throne. This would allow her conservative policies to continue and would protect her allies. She had the means and the opportunity. She controlled the palace, the doctors, and the food that was served to the emperor. Another major suspect is Yuan Shikai. He had even more reason to fear the emperor's return to power. Yuan had betrayed the emperor during the 1898 reforms, siding with Cixi and helping her to stage the coup. He knew that if the emperor ever regained power, he would be executed for treason. Poisoning the emperor was an act of self-preservation. He may have acted on his own or in collusion with Cixi. For a century, it was all speculation. There was no physical proof. The mystery took a dramatic turn in 2008, 100 years after the emperor's death. A team of Chinese researchers and forensic experts conducted a 5-year study on the emperor's remains. They took samples of his hair, his bones, and the clothes he was buried in. Using modern forensic techniques, they made a shocking discovery. They found massive levels of arsenic in his remains. The amount of arsenic in his stomach was more than 2,000 times higher than normal. The conclusion was inescapable. The Guangxu emperor had died of acute arsenic poisoning. The scientific evidence proved he was murdered. But it could not tell us who administered the poison. It confirms the how, but not the who. However, by confirming the murder, it makes the circumstantial case against Cixi and Yuan Shikai much stronger. Cixi remains the most likely culprit. On her deathbed, she would have had the strongest motive to ensure her legacy was protected. The image of the dying Empress Dowager giving one final, ruthless order to eliminate her nephew is a chilling one. It was the final act of a woman who had controlled China for half a century and was not about to lose her grip, even in death. The 100-year-old rumor was true. The emperor's death was not a mystery of medicine, but a mystery of murder. Number 6. What was Queen Victoria's real relationship with John Brown? Queen Victoria reigned for 63 years and gave her name to an era known for its strict morality and social conventions. But in her own life, particularly after the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, she defied those conventions in a way that scandalized her court and her family. The source of this scandal was her relationship with a Scottish servant named John Brown. He was a gillie, a hunting attendant from her Balmoral estate. He became her closest companion, her confidant, and her protector. The enduring mystery is the true nature of their relationship. Was he simply a loyal friend and servant, or was he something more? Prince Albert died in 1861. His death devastated Victoria. She plunged into a deep state of mourning that lasted for the rest of her life. She wore black every day and withdrew almost completely from public life. Her court became a gloomy, somber place. Her ministers worried that her seclusion was damaging the monarchy. In an attempt to coax her out of her grief, her doctors suggested she get more exercise and spend more time outdoors. They recommended she ride her pony regularly at her estate in Scotland. The man chosen to lead the pony was John Brown. And Brown was a Highlander. He was rugged, plain-spoken, and had no time for the stuffy protocols of the royal court. He treated the queen not as a monarch, but as a woman. He was often bossy with her, telling her what to do for her own good. He called her woman, not your majesty. To everyone else at court, this was shockingly disrespectful. To the lonely, grieving queen, it was a breath of fresh air. She was surrounded by people who bowed and scraped and were terrified of her. Brown was different. He was honest and direct. He became her anchor. Their relationship grew incredibly close. He was promoted to the queen's Highland servant. He was with her constantly. She came to depend on him for everything. He advised her on matters great and small. He was fiercely protective of her. She, in turn, showered him with gifts and honors. She commissioned portraits and statues of him. She wrote about him glowingly in her journals, praising his utter truthfulness and devoted attachment. The rest of the royal family and the court staff grew to resent him deeply. They saw him as an arrogant, often drunk, commoner who had far too much influence over the queen. They called him the Queen's Stallion behind her back. Rumors began to spread that their relationship was romantic, even intimate. This is the heart of the mystery. Was it a love affair? There is no direct proof. Victoria's journals from the period of their greatest closeness were edited after her death by her daughter, Princess Beatrice, who dutifully censored anything she felt was too personal or inappropriate. The pages that might have told the true story are gone. What we are left with are clues and speculation. Those who believe it was a romance point to the intensity of their connection. She was a passionate woman who had lost the love of her life. He was a strong, masculine presence who offered her comfort and companionship. The rumors were so persistent that some people began to refer to her as Mrs. Brown. There is also a story impossible to verify that a deathbed confession from a royal chaplain revealed that he had secretly married Victoria and John Brown. This is almost certainly a myth, but the fact that it was told shows how people viewed the relationship. Those who argue it was a platonic friendship point out that Victoria was a product of her time. A physical relationship with a servant would have been a catastrophic breach of the social order she represented. It would have been an unthinkable risk to the monarchy. They argue that she saw Brown as a kind of human link to her beloved Albert. Brown had worked for Albert, and in serving her, he was continuing that service. She could talk to him about Albert in a way she couldn't with others. He was a figure of absolute loyalty in a world of political maneuvering. John Brown died in 1883. Victoria was once again devastated. She wrote that she was utterly crushed. Her grief was as profound as it had been for Albert. She planned to write a biography of him, but her horrified ministers and family managed to talk her out of it. And she did, however, publish a book called Leaves from the Journal of Our Life in the Highlands, which was filled with praise for him. It was a bestseller, but it also fueled the gossip. The final clue comes from the instructions she left for her own funeral. When she died in 1901, she was buried as she had wished, with a lock of John Brown's hair, a picture of him, and his mother's wedding ring, which he had given to her. These items were placed in her left hand, hidden from view by a carefully placed bouquet of flowers. On the other side, she had a cast of Prince Albert's hand. In death, as in life, she kept them both close. The mystery is what that closeness really meant. Was it the great secret romance of her life, or a deep, unconventional friendship that the rest of the world simply couldn't understand? The edited journals and the silence of the grave mean we will probably never know for sure. Number 5. What became of Zenobia of Palmyra? She was the warrior queen of the Palmyrene Empire, a state that broke away from Rome in the 3rd century AD. From her capital in the oasis city of Palmyra in modern-day Syria, she carved out an empire that, at its peak, included Egypt and much of Asia Minor. She challenged the might of Rome and very nearly succeeded in creating a new Eastern Empire. She was brilliant, educated, and a skilled military strategist. In 272 AD, she was defeated and captured by the Roman Emperor Aurelian, and that is where her story becomes a mystery. What happened to her after she was taken to Rome? Zenobia came to power as regent for her young son after her husband, Odaenathus, the ruler of Palmyra, was assassinated in 267 AD. And Odaenathus had been a loyal ally of Rome, but Zenobia had grander ambitions. Rome was in a period of crisis, weakened by internal power struggles and constant wars. Zenobia saw an opportunity. She declared her son emperor and herself empress. She led her armies on a series of stunning conquests. She took control of the rich Roman province of Egypt, the breadbasket of the empire. She expanded her territory north into Anatolia. She was effectively in control of the vital trade routes between the east and the west. She created a court in Palmyra that was a center of learning, attracting scholars and philosophers. She claimed descent from Cleopatra, and like Cleopatra, she dreamed of an Eastern empire to rival Rome. For a few years, she was one of the most powerful women in the world, but her success could not last. In 270 AD, a strong new emperor, Aurelian, came to power in Rome. His mission was to reunite the fractured empire. He first dealt with threats in Europe, then he turned his attention east to Zenobia. In a swift and brilliant military campaign, he defeated Zenobia's armies in 2 major battles. He then besieged the city of Palmyra itself. Zenobia tried to escape on a camel to seek help from the Persians, Rome's great enemy. But she was captured by Roman cavalry before she could reach the border. Palmyra surrendered. Her dream of an empire was over. Roman historians give conflicting accounts of what happened next. The most famous and dramatic story comes from the Historia Augusta, a collection of Roman biographies. It says that Zenobia was brought back to Rome to be paraded in Aurelian's triumph, a massive victory parade to celebrate his success. She was supposedly bound in golden chains and loaded down with so much jewelry that she could barely walk. She was displayed to the crowds of Rome as the great captive queen, a symbol of Roman power and the futility of rebellion. This image has inspired countless paintings and stories, but what happened after the parade? This is where the accounts diverge. One version says that she died shortly after the triumph, either from illness or from a hunger strike. Another, more popular version says that Aurelian, impressed by her courage and intelligence, spared her life. He gave her a villa in Tivoli, near Rome. There, she lived out the rest of her days in comfortable retirement as a Roman matron. Her daughters supposedly married into noble Roman families, and her descendants were said to still be living in Rome centuries later. This is the story of a tamed queen, a warrior who became a philosopher in a Roman villa. There is a third, less flattering account. The historian Zosimus, writing a couple centuries later, tells a darker story. He claims that when Zenobia was captured and brought before Aurelian, she pleaded for her life. She blamed her rebellion on the bad advice of her counselors, including the philosopher Cassius Longinus. Aurelian, in this telling, executed her advisors but spared her. This version paints her not as a defiant hero, but as a pragmatic survivor who sacrificed her friends to save herself. So which story is true? We don't know. There is no definitive archaeological or historical evidence to confirm any of them. The story of her living out her life in a Roman villa is the most appealing, a tale of mercy and respect between two great adversaries. But it could also be a piece of Roman propaganda designed to show the emperor as both strong and magnanimous. The story of her death during the triumph is equally plausible. Ancient triumphs were grueling affairs, and a captive, disgraced queen could easily have succumbed to despair or disease. The mystery of Zenobia's final years is a reflection of how history is written by the victors. Her own account is lost. The Palmyrene records are gone. All we have are the stories told by the Romans, stories that may have been shaped to serve their own political purposes. Zenobia, the warrior queen, who built an empire and challenged Rome, disappears from the historical record after her capture. She is replaced by Zenobia, the symbol, the captive in golden chains, the retired philosopher, the betrayer of her friends. We know how her empire ended. We do not know how her life did. Number 4, what happened to the she-wolf of France? Isabella of France was the queen consort of King Edward II of England. She was celebrated in her youth as Isabella the Fair. But history remembers her by a more fearsome name, the she-wolf of France. In 1326, she led an invasion of England, overthrew her own husband, and installed her young son on the throne. She and her lover, Roger Mortimer, then ruled the country as regents. Her husband, Edward II, was imprisoned and died a few months later in what were widely believed to be horrific circumstances. Isabella's story is one of a queen who went from a victim to a conqueror. The mystery surrounds the final phase of her life. After she herself was overthrown by her son, she wasn't executed or exiled. She was forced into a comfortable, wealthy, and very quiet retirement. For the last 28 years of her life, she was a ghost, a powerful queen who was deliberately kept out of the public eye. What was she really doing during those long, silent years? Isabella was the daughter of the powerful King Philip IV of France. She was married to Edward II of England in 1308 to seal a peace treaty. She was beautiful and intelligent, but her marriage was a disaster from the start. Edward II notoriously neglected his wife in favor of a series of male favorites, first Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser. These men were given titles, lands, and power, while the queen was marginalized and often publicly humiliated. For years, Isabella endured her situation. She gave the king 4 children, including the heir, the future Edward III. She acted as a loyal queen and a diplomat. But the king's obsession with the Despenser family, father and son, became intolerable. They were corrupt and greedy, and they isolated the king from his wife and other nobles. Isabella came to hate them. In 1325, she was sent to France on a diplomatic mission. It was her chance to escape. In Paris, she refused to come home as long as the Despensers were in power. And there, she began an affair with Roger Mortimer, an English baron who had been exiled for opposing the king and the Despensers. Together, they became the focus of all opposition to Edward II. They raised a small army, and in September 1326, they invaded England. The invasion was stunningly successful. The English people and most of the nobility who were tired of the Despensers' misrule flocked to Isabella's side. The king's regime collapsed with almost no fighting. The Despensers were captured and executed. Edward II was captured and forced to abdicate his throne in favor of his 14-year-old son, who became King Edward III. Isabella and Mortimer were now the rulers of England. The deposed king, Edward II, was imprisoned in Berkeley Castle. He died there in September 1327. The official story was that he died of natural causes, but the popular belief then and now is that he was murdered on the orders of Isabella and Mortimer to prevent any attempts to restore him to the throne. For 3 years, Isabella and Mortimer ruled England, but they proved to be just as greedy and unpopular as the Despensers had been. Mortimer, in particular, behaved like a king, amassing huge wealth and power. The young King Edward III grew to resent being a puppet. In 1330, when he was nearly 18, he staged a coup. With a small group of loyal companions, he entered Nottingham Castle through a secret tunnel, surprised Mortimer and his mother, and arrested them. Mortimer was tried for treason and executed. Isabella's reign was over, and this is where the mystery begins. Given the brutal politics of the time, she was lucky to be alive. Her son spared her life, but what did he do with her? The traditional story is that she was forced into retirement at Castle Rising in Norfolk, where she lived a quiet, pious life, perhaps even suffering a bout of madness until her death in 1358. But recent historical research suggests a more complex picture. She was not a poor, isolated prisoner. Her financial records show that she maintained a massive, lavish household. She had a full staff of servants, knights, and ladies in waiting. She traveled frequently, visiting her various estates and making pilgrimages. She was still one of the wealthiest women in England. Her son, the king, visited her regularly. He seems to have forgiven her, at least to some extent. They appear to have had a perfectly civil, even affectionate relationship in her later years. So, what was she doing? Was she still involved in politics behind the scenes? It's possible. She had decades of experience in diplomacy and statecraft. Her son may have secretly consulted her on important matters, or was she completely removed from power, her life a constant performance of piety and retirement to ensure her own safety? Her every move would have been watched. She knew that any hint of political maneuvering could be fatal. Perhaps her lavish lifestyle and constant travel were a way to keep herself occupied and seem harmless. There is also the question of her state of mind. Did she feel guilt for what she had done to her husband? Or did she feel justified? Some accounts mention her having fits of distress or madness, but this could be propaganda from her enemies. Her own account books show a woman who was a meticulous manager of her own finances, a shrewd business person, and a patron of the arts. This doesn't sound like a woman who had lost her mind. Isabella lived for another 28 years after her fall from power, almost half her adult life. It is a long, silent period. The dramatic story of the she-wolf ends in 1330. What follows is an enigma. Was she a reformed character, a political advisor, a frightened prisoner in a gilded cage, or simply a wealthy dowager enjoying her retirement? She had been a queen, a rebel, an invader, and a ruler. In her final chapter, she became something even more mysterious, a private person. Her thoughts, her regrets, and her true relationship with the son who had overthrown her are all lost to history. Number 3, did Marie Antoinette ever say, "Let them eat cake"? It is one of the most famous quotes in history. During a famine, the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, upon being told that the common people had no bread, supposedly replied with the callous phrase, "Qu'ils mangent de la brioche," or "let them eat cake." This one sentence has come to symbolize the cluelessness and indifference of the monarchy to the suffering of its people. It helped to seal her fate. The only problem is, she almost certainly never said it. The mystery is not what she said, but how this devastating piece of fake news came to be so firmly attached to her name. Marie Antoinette was an Austrian archduchess who arrived in France in 1770 at the age of 14 to marry the future King Louis XVI. She was young, beautiful, and completely unprepared for the rigid and malicious world of the French court at Versailles. She was seen as a foreigner, Autrichian the Austrian woman, and was the target of gossip and criticism from the very beginning. She was extravagant, yes. She spent vast sums on fashion, jewelry, and her private retreat, the Petit Trianon. She was involved in scandals like the affair of the diamond necklace, a complex swindle in which she was an innocent victim, but which nonetheless severely damaged her reputation. She became a symbol for everything that was wrong with the monarchy, its wastefulness, its detachment, its foreignness. Let them eat cake story was the perfect weapon against her. It was simple, memorable, and utterly damning. It painted her as a woman who was not just extravagant, but cruel and stupid. But the evidence that she ever said it is non-existent. The phrase itself existed long before Marie Antoinette even came to France. A version of the story appears in the Confessions of the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He wrote about a great princess who, when told the peasants had no bread, said, "Let them eat brioche." At that time, Marie Antoinette was a child in Austria. She had no connection to France. The story was an old anecdote about the cluelessness of the aristocracy in general. It had been attributed to other princesses before her. So how did it get attached to her? It was a slow process of political assassination by rumor. In the years leading up to the French Revolution, the press was filled with pamphlets and cartoons viciously attacking the Queen. She was blamed for the country's financial problems, for her husband's political failures, for everything. The cake, quote, fit perfectly into this narrative. It was probably first attributed to her by revolutionary propagandists who knew a good story when they heard one. It spread by word of mouth, and people believed it, because it confirmed what they already thought about her, that she was a selfish foreigner who cared nothing for the French people. The mystery is why this particular smear has had such staying power. Part of the reason is that it's such a powerful story. It encapsulates a complex historical moment in a single memorable phrase. It's also because, in a broader sense, it felt true to people. Even if she didn't say those exact words, her lifestyle at Versailles was so far removed from the reality of a starving peasant that the sentiment seemed plausible. The story was emotionally true, even if it was factually false. There is also evidence that Marie Antoinette's real character was quite different. Her private letters show her to be a caring mother and a woman who was deeply concerned with charity. There are accounts of her helping poor families and funding orphanages. She wrote in one letter, "It is quite certain that in seeing the people who treat us so well, despite their own misfortune, we are more obliged than ever to work hard for their happiness." This is not the voice of a woman who would glibly suggest cake for the starving, but history is not always about facts. It is also about the stories we tell. The story of "let them eat cake" was more powerful than the truth. It helped to fuel the rage that led to the storming of the Bastille and the overthrow of the monarchy. Marie Antoinette went to the guillotine in 1793. Her reputation had been so thoroughly destroyed that few mourned her. She was executed not just for being the queen, but for being the queen that propaganda had created. The enduring mystery is a lesson in the power of misinformation. A centuries-old anecdote, a piece of political gossip, became an undisputed historical fact. It has been taught in schools and repeated in movies. It has defined the legacy of a queen. The real Marie Antoinette is a much more complex and tragic figure, a woman caught in a historical storm she did not create and could not control. But she is forever trapped by a handful of words that she never spoke. Number 2, what was wrong with the last Queen of Portugal? Her Queen Amélie of Orleans was the last queen consort of Portugal, her life was marked by immense personal tragedy and political upheaval. She was a witness to the violent end of her country's monarchy. The mystery surrounding her is not a single event, but a deep, unresolved question about her character and her role in the downfall of her own family. Was she a heroic, stoic figure who did her best in an impossible situation? Or was she a cold, unpopular queen whose own actions contributed to the public's hatred of the monarchy? Amélie was a French princess born in 1865. She was tall, elegant, and highly educated. In 1886, she married Carlos, the heir to the Portuguese throne. She was a dedicated queen. She learned Portuguese, embraced the culture, and founded numerous charities, including hospitals, tuberculosis sanatoriums, and kitchens for the poor. She was a pioneer in public health, but despite her good works, she was never truly popular with the Portuguese people. Part of the problem was her personality. She was seen as reserved, formal, and even arrogant. She maintained the stiff etiquette of a French royal court, which seemed out of place in the more relaxed atmosphere of Portugal. She was also seen as a domineering figure who had a great deal of influence over her husband, King Carlos I. He was an intelligent man and a talented painter, but he was not a strong political leader. The country was in a state of constant political crisis, with failing governments, financial instability, and the rise of a powerful anti-monarchist Republican movement. The royal family was blamed for all of it. They were seen as extravagant and out of touch. Amélie's French background and formal demeanor made her an easy target for criticism. The defining moment of her life came on February 1st, 1908. The royal family was riding in an open carriage through the main square in Lisbon. Suddenly, assassins from a Republican secret society opened fire. King Carlos was killed instantly. The heir, Crown Prince Luis Felipe, was mortally wounded. In that moment of chaos and horror, Queen Amelie's actions were extraordinary. She stood up in the carriage, trying to shield her younger son, Manuel, from the bullets. She then grabbed a bouquet of flowers she was holding and tried to beat one of the assassins with it. It was an act of incredible courage, but it was too late. Her husband and her eldest son were dead. Her younger son became King Manuel II. Her Amélie was now the queen mother. But the monarchy was doomed. The regicide had shocked the world, but within Portugal it only strengthened the Republican cause. The new king was young and inexperienced. The government was weak. Just 2.5 years later, in October 1910, a revolution broke out. The monarchy was abolished, and Portugal was declared a republic. The royal family was forced into exile. Amélie spent the rest of her long life in exile, mostly in France. She outlived her son Manuel, who died childless. With his death, the direct line of the Braganza, Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha dynasty came to an end. Amélie lived until 1951, dying at the age of 86. She was a living relic of a lost world. The mystery is how we should view her. Was she the brave hero of the 1908 regicide, a mother fiercely defending her family? Or was she, as her critics claimed, a haughty and unpopular queen whose coldness and political meddling helped to poison public opinion against the institution she represented? The truth is likely somewhere in between. Her good works are a matter of public record. She was genuinely committed to improving public health and helping the poor. But her personal style was clearly a political liability. In an age of rising democracy and republicanism, a queen who seemed to embody the aristocratic arrogance of the old regime was a problem. She may have been misunderstood. Her reserve could have been shyness rather than arrogance. Her dedication to royal protocol could have been her sense of duty rather than a desire to seem superior. We have her diaries, but they are often more of a record of events than a window into her soul. They show a woman who was deeply religious and devoted to her family, but they don't fully explain her complex public image. She remains a contradictory figure. She was a modernizer in her charity work, but a traditionalist in her courtly life. She was a courageous woman in a moment of crisis, but perhaps lacked the political skills to navigate the long, slow crisis that led to that moment. The unresolved question is how much a single person's personality can affect the course of history. Did the Portuguese monarchy fall simply because it was an outdated institution in a changing world? Or did the character of its last queen, her perceived coldness and foreignness, play a significant role in its final collapse? She was the last queen of a 1,000-year-old monarchy. Her story is the story of its end. The part she herself played in that ending remains a subject of debate. Number 1, who was the elder lady? In 1898, in a simple, undecorated tomb in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, a stunning discovery was made. The tomb, known as KV35, contained a hidden side chamber. Inside were the unwrapped mummies of 3 people, a young boy, a woman, and another older woman. For over a century, the identity of this older woman was one of the greatest puzzles in Egyptology. Her hair was long and regal. Her face was preserved with a look of serene power. She was clearly a person of immense importance. But who was she? Was she just another queen, or was she someone who had changed the course of history? The tomb where the mummies were found belonged to the pharaoh Amenhotep II. But it was clear these 3 mummies were not the tomb's original occupants. They had been moved there at a later date, probably by ancient priests who were gathering up the mummies of past royals to protect them from tomb robbers. The cache was a royal hiding place. The other mummies in the tomb were identified by inscriptions on their wrappings. But these 3 had no names. They were anonymous. The older woman came to be known simply as the Elder Lady. For decades, scholars debated her identity. The quality of her mummification was superb, fit for the highest royalty. The position of her left arm, bent across her chest with a clenched fist, was a pose sometimes associated with queens. Many candidates were proposed. For a long time, the leading theory was that she was Queen Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who was erased from history. Others suggested she might be Nefertiti, the lost queen of Amarna, but there was no way to prove it. The clues were tantalizing but inconclusive. A lock of hair found in a small coffinette in Tutankhamun's tomb, inscribed with the name of his grandmother, Queen Tiye, was found to be a good match for the hair of the elder lady. This was a strong piece of circumstantial evidence, but it wasn't proof. The mystery remained locked in her silent DNA. The breakthrough came in the 21st century. With the advent of advanced DNA analysis, it became possible to answer the question once and for all. A major project was launched to study the DNA of the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty, including Tutankhamun and the unidentified bodies from KV35. In 2010, the results were announced. The DNA of the elder lady was a match. She was the daughter of Yuya and Chuyu, 2 high-ranking nobles whose lavish tomb had been found nearly intact. And she was the mother of the mummy found in another tomb, KV55, who was identified as the pharaoh Akhenaten. This confirmed her identity beyond any reasonable doubt. The elder lady was Queen Tiye, the great royal wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, the mother of the heretic king Akhenaten and the grandmother of Tutankhamun. The solution to this mystery only opened up new questions and revealed the incredible story of this woman. Tiye was not just a queen, she was a major political force. She was born a commoner, not of royal blood. Yet she became the wife of one of Egypt's most magnificent pharaohs, Amenhotep III. Her influence was unprecedented. She was depicted in statues as being the same height as her husband, a symbol of her equal status. She was mentioned in official documents and diplomatic correspondence. Foreign kings wrote to her directly, a sign of her power. She was a key player in the government of the Egyptian empire at its absolute peak. She was also the mother who raised a revolution. Her son Akhenaten was the one who overthrew the traditional gods of Egypt. Did she support his radical new religion, or did she oppose it? Some evidence suggests she may have tried to moderate his views. She never seems to have abandoned the old gods herself. She lived through this period of immense religious and cultural turmoil. She saw her son create a new capital city, Amarna, and turn his back on centuries of tradition. She was the matriarch of this strange, controversial royal family. The identification of her mummy finally gave a face to this powerful woman. It also solved other puzzles. The DNA of the younger lady, the other unidentified woman found next to her, was also tested. She was identified as the sister of Akhenaten and the mother of Tutankhamun. This means that Tutankhamun's parents were brother and sister, a fact that may explain his many health problems. The story of the elder lady is a mystery that was solved by science. But the solution doesn't diminish her mystique. It enhances it. For 100 years, she was an anonymous figure of nobility. Now we know she was Queen Tai, a woman who stood at the center of power during one of the most dramatic and fascinating periods of human history. Her serene, powerful face is now the face of a woman who was a wife, a mother, and a political powerhouse, a queen whose influence shaped an empire and whose legacy was so important that even after her dynasty fell, the priests of a later age took care to save her body, preserving her memory and the mystery of her identity for over 3,000 years.